Chương trình này được bảo trợ bởi
Family Joy, tổ ấm y tế của mọi gia đình, 714 898 0765.
Hi, welcome to the OC Health and Education Show on Little Saigon TV. I'm your host, Julie Yip. To us, OC stands for our community because we believe that a community is stronger when we come together. We thank you for joining us each Tuesday evening on channel 56.10 and on Wednesday morning. As you know, this is a bilingual English and Vietnamese program dedicated to educating, empowering, and inspiring our community. And in the month of June, this is Pride Month, but specifically for us, it's Autism Pride Month. And here with us is Dr. Sharief Taraman. He is a pediatric neurologist and also the CEO of COGNOA to share with us an innovative evaluation to diagnose autism on the show today. Julie Yip kính chào quý vị khán giả của Little Saigon TV trong chương trình Kiến thức y khoa, gia đình và xã hội. Chương trình OC and Health and Education là chương trình song ngữ. Julie hy vọng mỗi tuần chúng tôi sẽ gặp nhau thứ ba lúc 7 giờ tối và sáng thứ tư nói về thông tin rất là quan trọng cho quý vị. Tháng 6 là một tháng để dành cho mình nói về hiểu thêm về người đồng tính, về người chuyển tính. That is about learning more about autism and autism pride. Julie, thank you so much and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Julie. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to share what we've been working on.
Well, tell me a little bit about yourself, because I know you're a pediatric neurologist, and in the world of autism, we know a lot of the doctors that diagnose our kids. But tell us a little bit about how you became a neurologist and why neurology of all the specialties.
Great question. So as Julie mentioned, I'm a pediatric neurologist. I did my training back in Detroit, and I think it was probably influenced to go into the pediatric subspecialty because my eldest daughter was actually born the first day of med school. I think that kind of makes you want to become a pediatrician. And I was just very fascinated with the way that the brain works in neurology. Wow. I had an engineering background and a technology background, and there's a lot of similarities between technology and how wires and computers work and the way the brain works. And so it was a really natural specialty to get into.
Wow, that's amazing. Because I know as we were preparing for the show, you keep on saying in my former life, in my past life. And I just love that you have so much enthusiasm and just a very varied, colorful training in so many arena. And I'm learning now also engineering. Thưa quý vị khán giả, hôm nay Julie nói chuyện với Dr. Sharief Taraman. Dr. Sharief Taraman là một người neurologist, là bác sĩ não chuyên về mấy trẻ em, mà thiệt ra chú ý về em tự kỷ. Hôm nay Julie muốn chia sẻ với quý vị là Dr. Taraman là học medical school ở Detroit, mà Julie đặt một cái câu hỏi là tại sao mình phải chọn neurology và tại sao pediatric neurology. Neurology là một khóa và chú ý về bộ não, về phát triển về bộ não. Về Dr. Taraman nói lúc mà Dr. Taraman học medical school là học được thành bác sĩ, có một đứa con thì lúc đó thì Dr. Taraman muốn hiểu thêm làm sao cái bộ não phát triển cho một trẻ em giống như con có ảnh. Dr. Taraman, I just wanted to make sure that the audience know kind of why the passion you got into it. But in the Vietnamese American culture, when you become a doctor, an engineer, or alike, your parents will be so proud of you. So is your parent proud that you're a doctor?
Yes, I also have immigrant parents, and the choices that we had was be a doctor or an engineer.
And you were both.
I did both.
You're an overachiever, I can see that.
There you go, exactly. But no, I think I came to CHOC here in Orange County because our CEO Kim Kripe and a good colleague of mine, Anthony Chang, really gave me an opportunity and a space to work on things that were really innovative and try and improve healthcare through technology. And that was an opportunity that really didn't exist anywhere else. And so when I came to CHOC and I came to Orange County, I had that freedom to really do kind of amazing things. And it kind of led to where I am today.
And I love the intersection of fields and profession, and especially when it's within one person. The innovation is just beautiful, because I love what you said, that you're able to merge the field of technology and science and healthcare, because oftentimes it's so disjointed. It's not
Absolutely.
connected. So tell me, how does that benefit you for having a background in engineering and being a doctor and a neurologist specifically?
You know, engineers are trained to identify problems and they're trained to come up with solutions. And so I think having not only been raised by engineers, both my parents were, but also being able to apply that in medicine. You know, medicine's a little bit more like detective work, and there's a
Yes.
little bit of art there. But you're right, it's this marriage or this intersection between kind of different disciplines that I think really brings new ideas to the
Right.
table. And honestly, actually, I think that also touches on Pride Month, which you're talking about, which is diversity.
Yes.
And diversity is actually one of the most important things that you can do to really drive the advancement of humanity.
And I think that's one thing that we really have to talk about is, as far as Pride Month is concerned, we have to see that that everyone is different. Sexuality, belief system, education, and training. But I think once we learn how to celebrate each other and celebrate the diversity, I think that's when the community becomes stronger and more innovative. Today, I know it's a very special time because we get to learn about what COGNOA is and what is the innovation that we have in store. Thưa quý vị, hôm nay Julie có thời gian nói chuyện với Dr. Sharief Taraman. Dr. Sharief Taraman, Julie đang học hiểu đó là vừa kỹ sư, là vừa bác sĩ, mà bác sĩ là bác sĩ não. Mà bác Dr. Taraman nói đó là lúc mình có cái người engineer là kỹ sư đó, là có cái cách mà mình phải làm problem solving, có cái câu chuyện gì, có khó khăn gì mình muốn sửa đổi cái đó, mà điều cái người bác sĩ là Dr. Taraman nói là giống như cái detective vậy, nó bệnh gì mình phải tìm hiểu thêm, mà lúc mà mình có hai cái nghề nghiệp đi làm việc với nhau thì mình thấy là có cái hiệu quả nó tốt hơn. Hôm nay Julie hy vọng có thời gian nói chuyện với cái company của bác sĩ Dr. Taraman, đó là COGNOA, mà hỏi thêm là cái phương pháp làm sao để cho giúp người tự kỷ là mình xác nhận bệnh tự kỷ sớm hơn. Dr. Taraman, I know there's so many things that I want to talk about. We talked about inclusion, we're talking about diversity, we're talking about innovation. These are all words that really excite me. But more importantly, as a speech pathologist by myself, who specializes in brain injury, but also loves the pediatric side of what I do, I care a lot about early diagnosis and early intervention. And, in the Vietnamese community where I reside and where I work, so many times we're looking at kids who are 5, 10, 20 years old, never, ever getting a formal diagnosis of autism or having that very comprehensive evaluation. What are some of the reasons why you feel that it's so important for us to get an early diagnosis and early detection of this disease?
Yeah, so this is one of those challenges that actually not only affects the Vietnamese community, but actually many communities that are either immigrant, females actually were excluded completely from the original diagnosis of autism. And so what you see is this continued bias that happens in diagnosis. So we know, on average, if you're from the African American, Hispanic, Asian American, female, low socioeconomic status, and a number of other kind of demographic type features, you're less likely to get diagnosed.
Right.
You're more likely to get misdiagnosed with something else. And if you do get a diagnosis, on average, it's going to be much later than a white male from an affluent background.
All that you're saying, it just sounds like me. It sounds like you're describing me, because I didn't get diagnosed until I was 42. And a lot of times, when I go to my doctor and I said, I have autism, can you help me treat this? And they didn't treat it. They, again, diagnosed me with other mental health conditions. And I think that's why I am so motivated to this show, because I want more people to understand that early diagnosis helps you with your mental wellness, because it's accepting of who you are, but more importantly, being able to access more services. After the commercial break, we'll continue our conversation. Julie, cảm ơn quý vị khán giả của Little Saigon TV. Sau phòng quảng cáo, chúng tôi sẽ tiếp tục nói chuyện với Dr. Taraman, là pediatric neurologist and CEO of COGNOA. Cảm ơn quý vị khán giả của Little Saigon TV.
Chương trình này được bảo trợ bởi
Family Joy, tổ ấm y tế của mọi gia đình, 714 898 0765.
Hi, welcome back to the OC Health and Education Show on Little Saigon TV. In the month of June, this is Pride Month, but specifically for my specialty and my love and passion, it's Autism Pride Month. And we have invited Dr. Sharief Taraman to talk about autism, early diagnosis, and so many other topics that really excites me. When just before the commercial break, we talk about how there are a lot of things that get in the way of a diagnosis, being female, being Asian, being low income. All of those is what I identify with, and I know that I attribute that cause a lot of delays in my diagnosis. But I want to learn from you, what does it mean for you as a doctor and as a physician or diagnostician to change the criterions and the description of the disease?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting thing. So we know that as the brain is developing,
Yes.
one of the hypotheses or ways we think autism happens is that the brain actually increases the number of connections that it has between the brain cells or neurons. And if you have too many connections, it can actually make you really good in certain areas and even more maybe have better skills maybe in a specific area than what we call neurotypical individuals. But if you overdo it, it can actually cause some distress or challenges for that individual. And so what we know, though, is that we can actually do some of these early interventions, like speech therapies, for example. So if you have a child who has some speech issues, who has autism spectrum disorder, or what we call autism as a disorder, getting that early speech intervention during the 18 months to maybe 6 years is really this like peak window of opportunity. And if you miss that, it's really hard to make a difference.
Because as a speech pathologist, that's a really crucial time for us. That's where your brain kind of sets in, and the schema of the brain and how it lays out. So I'm always talking about early intervention, but for me as a speech pathologist, I talk at early intervention at birth, specifically for individuals who have siblings with autism.
Absolutely.
So I think that's, for me, as I told you, I'm a little bit troublemaker. So sometimes when I do that, the system, the healthcare system push back. Sometimes, oftentimes the regional center early intervention system kicks back. But I think for those of us who are very proactive, we do want to make sure that these kids have those early services to infant stimulation and also to help rewire the brain early on. So thank you so much, Doctor, for sharing all that. Hôm nay Julie có thời gian nói chuyện với Dr. Taraman. Dr. Taraman là một bác sĩ child neurologist. Hôm nay mình hiểu thêm là cái bệnh triệu chứng tự kỷ là hồi xưa là chỉ là diễn về mình nói chuyện về cái người đàn ông hơn cái người boy có bị tự kỷ, mà nhiều lúc không có diễn tả về cái người phụ nữ có tự kỷ, giống như Julie có tự kỷ, mà nhiều lúc bác sĩ không có biết chẩn đoán về cái bệnh của mình, thì Dr. Taraman hy vọng có cái phương pháp để cho mình tìm sớm hơn. Dr. Taraman nói đó là triệu chứng tự kỷ là quan trọng là trước nhất mình phải hiểu thêm về cái triệu chứng, sau đó mình mới được giúp mỗi gia đình về cái vấn đề của mỗi gia đình khác nhau. Doctor, there's every family has different scenarios and different situations that can impede on an early diagnosis. What is it that you think you can do with your technology to help specifically immigrants family and minority family and low-income family to be able to get, first of all, the early diagnosis, but more importantly to me, the early services that they need?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing actually is I'm working with a student from Cal State Fullerton. He's a graduate student. His name's David. And we've actually been working on a book for the Vietnamese community and other communities to help educate them that seeing a pediatrician and having actually what we call well child visits are actually really important. Sometimes culturally, immigrant families only see the doctor if their children are sick. And really, especially in that early intervention period from birth, we want to be monitoring development, and it's really important. Just like you get your car tuned up, your child needs well child visits.
So well child tune-up.
Absolutely. The other thing, though, is that, to your point, right, what we wanted to do is really democratize or make it accessible for people to be able to get a diagnosis. And one of the biggest challenges is there's a shortage of physicians. There's a shortage of people that can, quote unquote, do the diagnosis. And so what we did is we used artificial intelligence to identify what were the maximally predictive features of autism, and then enable a mobile application that can be ordered by any clinician, any healthcare provider to use, where the parents download it, answer questions, upload videos of their child, and then the physician does their part or the healthcare provider does their part. And then those three things are provided back to the clinician so that they can understand what's going on with that child's development and get to an answer as early as 18 months. All that has actually gone through the FDA and is now available. The help that we need is probably getting it out to the communities, making awareness of it, and then working to make sure that it's available for all families through Medicaid, as an example, or Medi-Cal.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like as you were talking about that, and with technology, I'm thinking about we're able to access families who are in the rural areas and might not have the expert, because the big cities, there's a lot of us who are experts and who work in the field, but in some of the other cities or small towns, families can't access this. Are we talking about telehealth and distant services?
Yeah, actually in the clinical trial that we ran, we looked at telehealth use of it, and it works equally in telehealth. The other thing is that we were very sensitive to make sure that we actually had a very representative sample of the United States population, including Asian Americans, which was really important for us. We're currently available in English, and today we will go live with Spanish. Vietnamese is on my roadmap, as are other languages, because this is really important. This was the frustration for me of seeing families get diagnosed late and not have that benefit of early intervention was actually a large motivator for me to go into this endeavor and become the CEO of COGNOA.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for doing that. For me, when I work as an expert witness and go to IEP meetings, what I notice is that to translate in Vietnamese is one of the most difficult language because it's a descriptive language. I had one meeting where I had to fire 6 interpreters because they were using the wrong words, like occupational therapy, and they literally translate it as a job, And so I think that's one thing about it is I appreciate you, having an intern that is Vietnamese American, or having an intern that has that interest in expanding and helping more of the API community. Thưa quý vị, hôm nay chúng ta hiểu thêm về cái COGNOA là một cái program để giúp cho bác sĩ về mấy người làm trong nghề để giúp để diagnose tự kỷ sớm. Nhiều lúc có mấy em mà bị tự kỷ thì có thể là không có đủ bác sĩ, không có đủ bác sĩ mà nhi đồng về để cho hiểu thêm về tự kỷ. Mà thiệt ra cái technology đây là trước nhất cho bố mẹ mình phải upload cái app, then mình trả lời vài câu, mình để lên vài cái hình để cho bác sĩ, hay cái video cho bác sĩ xem. Thêm nữa, mình có vẫn về bác sĩ, chừng nào mình ở xa, mình không có thời gian tới cái người specialist đó. Cái technology hiện tại sẽ có thể giúp cho quý vị tìm cái người bác sĩ giỏi mà không có ở gần nhà mình. Doctor, that's what I was just saying in Vietnamese. That what I think this technology is going to do and amazingly be able to be accomplished is those of us who are expert in the field. And we might be just serving people in Southern California, but this will allow us to serve people in other areas. And those of us who hyper specialize sometimes, we are able to hit a specific demographic. Because the things that I care about in speech therapy specifically are quote unquote high functioning autism, female autism. And also those that are in the LGBTQ community. So I think, for those of us who have that really specialist within a specialty, I hope we become more accessible to people around the world.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of work to do.
Yes.
We are actually have done some work actually in the Philippines already. We've done some work in China. And we're hoping to continue to do work, really, because this is not a U.S. issue. This is a global issue, and it affects lots of communities. And the more that we can help the kids out and help identify early, I think that we get to a point where the reality is that, there's different degrees of condition. So, I often liken this because I think autism sometimes still people don't really understand it, and so. It's funny, like, people understand maybe obsessive compulsive disorder better. And so one of the ways that I equate this is, I can have obsessive compulsive traits, but I don't have a disorder if it doesn't affect my ability to function in the world. And part of, I think, what early intervention does, if we look at early intervention for individuals who have autism, what we find is that maybe even up to 25% or more can not have a disorder. And so now the autism is the neurodivergence. It's how you function in the world, but it's not a disorder per se. And I think that this is a big differentiator between what you term or people term high functioning autism, which is really neurodivergence, I think, versus autism spectrum disorder, which actually has a lot of challenges and they can't really function in society.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Doctor, for this. After the commercial break, we'll be able to describe this a little bit more so our community can understand all the technical words that you're mentioning. Julie, cảm ơn quý vị khán giả của Little Saigon TV. Sau phần quảng cáo, chúng tôi sẽ hỏi thêm về, hiểu thêm về neurodivergent and cái chữ cái disorder. Cảm ơn quý vị khán giả của Little Saigon TV.
Chương trình này được bảo trợ bởi
Family Joy, tổ ấm y tế của mọi gia đình. 714 898 0765.
Hi, welcome back to the OC Health and Education Show on Little Saigon TV. I'm your host, Julie Yip. This is one of the shows that I'm most excited about because it's about what I do. It's about my personality. It's how all the challenges and all the accomplishment that I have yet. Just before the commercial break, Dr. Taraman, you've mentioned about the disorder, the disease versus the neurodivergent. And I think that's one thing that, these are words that you and I understand completely or almost completely, but I think the community might have a hard time understanding what that means. So I'm going to try my best to explain it in Vietnamese, and maybe you can clarify what I said in Vietnamese and tell me if I'm on the right track. Thưa quý vị, hôm nay Julie muốn cho quý vị hiểu thêm hai cái chữ. Một cái chữ trước là disease, là cái triệu chứng về cái bệnh của tự kỷ. Nhiều em bị tự kỷ khó khăn tiếp xúc với mọi người, về khó khăn có nhiều thành công lúc mà học hành, làm việc, có công việc, với có relationship, thì đó là về cái disease mà bác sĩ sử dụng một cái chữ thêm đó, kêu bằng là neurodivergent. Neurodivergent là một cái người là cũng bị tự kỷ mà có khả năng đi làm, sống là có tự do chút, mà điều giống như Julie muốn nói chuyện với bác sĩ là không phải là neurodivergent, là không phải là không có tự kỷ, mà nhiều cái triệu chứng của tự kỷ nó không có ảnh hưởng tới mức nào mà không có khả năng học hành, không có khả năng có bằng cấp, không có khả năng lập gia đình, không có khả năng tìm công việc làm. Thì hôm nay chúng ta sẽ tiếp tục nói chuyện với Dr. Taraman cho hiểu thêm cái ý của Dr. Taraman nói về disease, disorders, and neurodivergent. Dr. Taraman, I said, first of all, I agree with you in many points, but there are some points I disagree. And so the one thing that I said I disagree is that this is just my personal belief, not anybody else. But I think it's because I am a person on the spectrum, and I struggled through college. I didn't have the grades to go to a four-year university. I went to Pasadena City College. I eventually got into Loma Linda, and I actually finished ahead of my schedule. So by 23, I got my master's degree. But throughout my educational career, no one wanted to hang out with me. No one would be at a project with me. I didn't know how to talk to people. I had a hard time with a lot of things. But I think to what you were saying, that the disease did impair my ability to socialize, did impair my ability to self-advocate, but it did not impair my ability to get the academic success, which is a master's degree at 23. But it did not also impair my ability to get a job at the hospital or even open my own clinic or be my own successor. But it's not to say that I don't have challenges. On my show and every time I help people, I always say, I might have a smile, but I'm still depressed. I might be successful, but I still need medication. I need all of these things, and I need a lot of check-in and a support of my friends and my community. So I want to ask you, Doctor, what are your thoughts in general about access to healthcare? Because I currently still have a hard time getting medication. I have a hard time getting a doctor. I have a hard time working with doctors in my network that really knows me. So I have to pay out of pocket for celebrity doctors, but not everybody has that access, doctor.
So this is the thing. So how would your life potentially have been different if you had been diagnosed when you were 18 months or 2 years old versus now? And I think what we know is the literature and the evidence suggests that early identification and early intervention actually can change the trajectory.
Yes.
And so I think that there's a potential that rather than having a disability, which clearly you have, that's no denying that, right? You identify, you understand that.
Yes.
But the debate in the community, from the autism community, is some advocate that you should not call it a disability and you should not call it a disorder.
Right.
And for those individuals, I would argue that that's fine. And for them, it's not. But for others, it is, and we should not discount that. And for others, it's even more profound, right? I wouldn't go far as to call it a disease. I don't think that that's the right term. Now, there may be genetic diseases that cause disorder of autism. Sorry to be nitpicking here on words, but again, this is the thing about it, and that's why it's a spectrum. And I think that's why it's maybe a little bit more misunderstood, and I think it's why it's maybe more challenging for individuals to understand, because it spans a lot. The biggest thing that you shouldn't do is be in denial. I think as parents, as community members, I think this is one of those things, again, as we talked about in the beginning, if you embrace it and you understand self, it makes a huge difference for everyone.
And I like what you said about, not being in denial, because the acceptance doesn't necessarily have to come with a diagnosis, but accepting of the symptomology and the impact it has on the child's ability to learn, have friends, and have meaningful relationship. So I think I like the way you said that, because when you talk about not being able to deny something, I think maybe families have a hard time with a diagnosis per se, but they don't have a hard time recognizing that their child is struggling, or their child is lonely, or doesn't have the support he requires. So thank you, doctor, for having this candid conversation and being able to discuss openly what these words mean to a lot of us, those of us who are in the field, those of us who are on the spectrum, and those of us who have family members that have autism. But I think from what we're learning today is depends on which angle you're looking at autism. Your perspective on the terminology that's used, the word that are used will change. So thank you for allowing us to have a varied perspective on how we look at autism. Thưa quý vị, hôm nay chúng ta có thời gian nói chuyện với Dr. Taraman. Như quý vị thấy đó, hôm nay mình nói là chi tiết về cái triệu chứng tự kỷ. Bác sĩ nói là cái chữ disease là cái chứng bệnh, cái disorder là cái nó hiệu quả làm sao nó ảnh hưởng mình, mà sao nữa là cái neurodivergent. Quý vị thấy đó là lúc mà mình xem về cái bệnh tự kỷ á, có thể cái em đó có bị rối loạn về cái bộ não, thì đó là cái bệnh đó kêu bằng cái disease. Mà chừng nào nó ảnh hưởng về cái hành vi của em, về cái khả năng học hành, có thể mình nói là cái disorder. But the neurodivergent, giống như cái người mà có nhiều cái thành công á, thì mình có thể xem cái chữ neurodivergent. Mà quý vị, cái chữ nào mình sử dụng về cho tự kỷ cũng ok, tùy theo cái hướng nhìn cho về cái triệu chứng đây. Giống như mình á, chừng nào Julie là speech pathologist, mình muốn xài cái chữ disease, because cái chữ disease thì bác sĩ cái healthcare nó mới trả tiền. Chừng nào mình nói là mình chỉ có cái difference hoặc chỉ có cái khác biệt giống như người khác, thì khó khăn xin được cái chương trình để cho học ở học khu, hoặc khó khăn xin cho bác sĩ hoặc cái insurance trả tiền cho cái đi học speech therapy cho được học hành. You know, doctor, what I was also mentioning, and hopefully you caught some of the English words that I mentioned, was that, it depends on which hat I put on, changes the words that I use. Because when I'm putting on the speech pathologist hat, I have to use the word disease. Because if there's a disease, the insurance will pay for it.
Yeah.
The insurance will give therapy and fund services. If I talk about disorders or differences, it's when I am the individual with autism, because I want to believe that I am the same, but I just have a different way of thinking. I think the same such that capabilities. I still have the same opportunities and the same ability to have friends, have a relationship, have a romantic relationship, because sometimes people with autism don't really understand that, or they understand it differently. And that's where I'm going to segue a little bit over to how the intersection between autism and the LGBTQ community comes in. Can you give me a little bit thought before, and we're going to go in commercial break soon.
Sure. Yeah, this is again the way that the brain is wired. So for each of us, we have patterns of wiring, we have experiences in our lives that make us who we are.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, right, I think the most important thing is, I think meeting people where they're at, right? If I and I think I've come, as I've aged, I've kind of becoming actually more accommodating of this. You should accept if I say, I would prefer that you call me this way, or say my name this way, right? It's a kindness. It's a human nature to be kind and to accommodate that.
Well, thank you so much, Doctor, for mentioning that. But after the commercial break, I'm going to have a lot more questions. Thưa quý vị khán giả, hôm nay chúng ta nói chuyện với Dr. Taraman. Julie hỏi thêm về làm cái ảnh hưởng về cái intersection between autism, về mấy người đồng tính và người chuyển tính. Hôm nay mình hiểu thêm là cái bộ não của mình là bác sĩ nói đó là giống như hyperwire, là có nhiều dây thần kinh quá chứ không phải là không có thần kinh. Mấy em tự kỷ là rất là thông minh, có thể thông minh quá mà điều tại có nhiều dây thần kinh quá, nó bị rối loạn, khó tập trung, khó chú ý, về nó có nhiều hành vi nó bị khó khăn, về hơi khó chịu chút. Thì hy vọng sau phần quảng cáo chúng tôi sẽ hiểu thêm về triệu chứng tự kỷ, về có thời gian nói chuyện với Dr. Taraman and hiểu thêm về cái technology of COGNOA. Cảm ơn quý vị khán giả của Little Saigon TV.
Chương trình này được bảo trợ bởi
Family Joy, tổ ấm y tế của mọi gia đình, 714 898 0765.
Hi, welcome back to the OC Health and Education Show on Little Saigon TV. We're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Sharief Taraman. You know, I know we're getting very technical today, but you know, we got to go back to Autism 101, Dr. Sharief. First of all, what is autism to you?
Yeah, so this is a great question. Thank you. Well, we were just saying maybe it was not too much science show. But you know, I think this is, again, it's the way that the brain is connected. And so I think a really good example, and maybe getting into like some of the specifics, would be sensory issues are one of the areas that often arise with autism. And so if you think about the way that I interpret information, if something touches my skin, if you interpret it in the middle, you know, a little bit of touch is fine. But sometimes if you overinterpret it, this touch becomes now painful or discomforting or uncomfortable. Vice versa, I may not be getting enough of that sensory, and so I may want hard touch. So what we see is oftentimes parents will recognize, or individuals will recognize, that the way that they interact with the world is different, touch being one of them, speech being another area, or social cues are different. The way that they interpret facial emotions actually is really interesting. So one of the big challenges is social interactions in autism. We actually have breakthrough status with the FDA, working on a device that actually engages parents and children in play so that they learn the social emotional cues that happen in the world and understand how to navigate them better, as an example.
Well, I liked how you explained what autism is from that standpoint. Because, you know, as a speech pathologist, when someone asks me, what's autism? I always say, well, they have a hard time talking, they have a hard time connecting to other people, they might have behaviors or what you call that connectivity that is either heightened or reduced. And so I think that's what causes a lot of some of those behaviors we see, where, you know, they might be covering their ears, they might be tiptoeing, they might be staring away and playing with the toys inappropriately. So I think what you explained with autism is very practical in a sense, where I think the audience can understand that our brain is basically wired differently, and that, you know, the signals are there, but we sense it in a different level.
Absolutely.
So I think it's kind of like a calibration or like a recognition of those multiple senses coming in, and we have so many senses. We want to believe there's 5, but there might be a 6, right?
Or more.
Or more. Thưa quý vị, hôm nay chúng ta muốn diễn tả thêm là triệu chứng tự kỷ á, là trước nhất á, là as a speech pathologist, cái người âm ngữ trị liệu, Julie nói trước nhất á, là mấy em tự kỷ có khó khăn nói chuyện, mà có khó khăn tiếp xúc với mọi người. Có thể cái chữ là không phải là cái cách mình tiếp xúc với mọi người, không, cái cách mình, cái con mắt của mình, cái hành động của mình, cái body của mình, cái cơ thể của mình á, cái cách mình nói chuyện, mình tiếp xúc với mọi người sẽ ảnh hưởng. Thêm nữa, giống như Dr. Taraman nói đó, là cái triệu chứng tự kỷ là nó kêu bằng là the problem with connectivity, là ảnh hưởng về cái bộ não của mình. Bộ não của mình là có rất nhiều cái dây thần kinh, mà so với trẻ em tự kỷ, dây thần kinh là có nhiều quá chứ không phải là ít quá. Chừng nào mình có ít connection là có thể bị chậm trí tuệ. Cái đây là về tự kỷ là có nhiều dây thần kinh quá thì nó bị là có thể mình đụng, giống bác sĩ nói đó, chừng nào có ai rờ tay, cái chừng nào mình có low sensory thì nó có thể nó không có biết là mình rờ tay nó, mà có thể mà đứa nào mà kiểu bằng hypersensitive, mình rờ chút mà nó đau nhất, thì quý vị thấy đó là triệu chứng tự kỷ ảnh hưởng cách tiếp xúc, về cái cách nói chuyện, mà cũng là cái response to cái stimuli hay cái sensory. Mình thấy là mình có con mắt, về mình nhìn vô, có thể mình đi đâu á thì em tự kỷ nó thấy sáng quá, hay có thể nó sáng sủa mà nó không thấy gì hết tại nó thấy tối quá, thì mọi cái cách ảnh hưởng về con mắt của mình cái mũi mình, lỗ tai của mình, cái tay chân của mình nó bị ảnh hưởng hết luôn về trẻ tự kỷ. You know, doctor, I think I was able to explain what my definition of it from a speech pathologist standpoint, but I love the neurological definition of what it is. And I love this conversation because we can actually marry both of our fields together. Absolutely. And hopefully the audience can understand that, you know, with the technology that you're presenting today, it'll help the community because, you know, most of the time autism to us is about describing what we have. But hopefully this technology will help us become more objective in the diagnosis and having families providing videos and evidence that we as clinicians can watch and also help diagnose further what the child's going through.
Absolutely. I'll give one more other good one that I use a lot. I think that the viewers will understand. So I'm sure all the viewers want their children to be good at math. So how do you get your children to be good at math? You have them practice mathematics. In the same way, though, that the brain can get really good at stuff that maybe you don't want it to be good at. So if you practice something like anxiety, your anxiety will get stronger, and the longer you allow it to go on, the harder it is to turn it off or to unwind it. And so this is, again, this importance of identifying things early and addressing them, because the way the brain works is the more you do it, the stronger it gets, and the harder it is to unwind it. So if you practice lots of math, you get good at math, and you'll always be good at math, even if you take a break. But if you practice things that cause anxiety as an example, which we know happens in autism, if left untreated or left unaddressed, things that cause anxiety, that's not good for the brain. That's not healthy for the body.
Now, doctor, this is me asking a question as even a patient or a person on the spectrum because, you know, when you use that analogy, it makes me think a little bit something differently because, you know, when you're learning math or even speech, you know, sometimes people come to me and say, well, my child's not talking. And then I'm teaching them how to talk. Then the next complaint is, my child's talking too much. Right, doctor? So my question to you is, can you almost unlearn it? Because, you know, when I go through anxiety, I feel like it's like an operant conditioning or these triggers that I have. And I feel like it's really hard to unlearn. But I feel that I'm more equipped when I have the medication. I'm not closer to the edge. I get to stay a little further, and it makes my body now unlearn it a little bit better. Now, Is there a way to unlearn neural connectivity?
Yeah, absolutely. So so after that early intervention window that I mentioned, which is 18 months to 6 years, you get another one that opens up during adolescence. So if you notice what happens, we get hyper focused on the body changes that happen during puberty, you know, but actually there's a lot that happens in the brain, specifically in the front part called the frontal lobe. That's the other one that happens during puberty. And then just like you learn Vietnamese later in life, you can change and you can teach your brain. What you got to do though is you got to balance it out probably 2 times what you're doing. So if you say, I have anxiety for an hour, then I need 2 hours of anti-anxiety to balance out the 1 hour of anxiety that you had, or depression, or whatever the thing is that you're having. You have to like double up on the other side.
Got it. Well, thank you so much, doctor. As we close the program, I try my best to explain it and think about what you're going to say and the message we want our audience to take away from this show today. Thưa quý vị, hôm nay Julie ráng nói về cái phương pháp mà bác sĩ nói, giống như bác sĩ nói đó là từ chưa tư tự kỷ là giống như cái bệnh khác. Chừng nào giống như mình học toán, chừng nào mình học mãi thì cái dây thần kinh của mình nó sẽ nhớ về, nó sẽ làm việc mau hơn. Mà chừng nào mình bị anxiety, bị hồi hộp, mình giống như mình học hay mình bị anxiety nhiều quá thì nó giữ lâu hơn. Bác sĩ nói chừng nào mình bị anxiety 2 tiếng đồng hồ, mình phải làm cái phương pháp gì nó làm cho mình không có bị anxiety. So với cái cá nhân của Julie thích đi bơi, hay Julie thích ra ngoài làm vườn, hay thích đi hiking, thì Julie phải làm nhiều hơn cái mức độ mà mình bị anxiety mới hơi bị thành bình thường, hay bị khỏe lại. Thì hôm nay Julie rất hơi hẳn để giới thiệu cho quý vị Dr. Sharief Taraman là một người bác sĩ child neurologist, là bác sĩ não về nhi đồng ở bệnh viện Chalk Hospital, mà cũng là một người inventor cho cái chương trình cái bằng COGNOA giúp cho mình sớm nhập về triệu chứng tự kỷ sớm hơn. Doctor, what would you like to say as we close out the show today?
You know, I was thinking about it, and I think the thing that I appreciate a lot about indigenous cultures and actually a lot of Eastern culture is this concept of like harmony and like finding balance. And I think that that's a lot what we're trying to do in life. And I think if you can find balance of early identification for autism, early intervention for autism, being accommodating of challenges and maybe adjusting the way that we work as a society, I think that that's beautiful and that's a good thing. And that's what we should be striving for.
Well, thank you so much, Doctor, for that message and that reminder. Because I
Thank
know
you.
in my mental health journey, balance was a key. Because I'm either really happy or not so happy at all. So, cảm ơn quý vị khán giả của Little Saigon TV đã theo dõi chương trình Kiến thức y khoa gia đình và xã hội. Hôm nay, Julie muốn nhắc nhở quý vị, giống bác sĩ Sharief Taraman nói đó, là cái chữ balance là quan trọng nhất. Là không phải là mình đi một hướng đây hay hướng nọ, mình phải có cái balance chính giữa, là đứng chính giữa. Cho mình vui quá cũng tốt, mà điều sometimes mình buồn quá. Chứ người về triệu chứng là tự kỷ, ha bị bệnh thì ha bị bệnh tâm bệnh, có thể họ không có cái balance, thì lúc đó luôn luôn chừng nào mình còn uống thuốc thì mình phải đi bác sĩ não, mình phải còn exercise hay mình phải còn tìm cái phương pháp nào để làm cho mình có khỏe hơn. Thì Julie luôn luôn chúc quý vị nhiều sức khỏe và may mắn. Cảm ơn quý vị khán giả của Little Saigon TV.